Perfect. All right, so we are live. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Wild and Precious Optimal Living Show, the radio show dedicated to increasing your resilience strategies and optimizing your adaptability. Today, I'm flying solo. No Dr. Lynn. She's out camping with Rivers out in the mountains, so it's just me. And I've got a great guest for you guys today. I'm super excited about this one. I've had this in the back of my mind for a long time, for a lot of these topics that we're going to discuss, and man, I'm stoked. So today we've got the legend, the chiropractic legend, Dr. Steve Hoffman. Dr. Steve started his practice in 1980 and entered into a community devastated by double-digit inflation and double-digit unemployment. Probably sounds familiar to what we're experiencing right now. He quickly grew one of the most successful and largest family practices in Michigan and the surrounding states, serving babies, expecting moms, and hardworking dads. He also developed a technique that we use personally in our office, MC Squared, which stands for Mastering Chiropractic with Certainty. And while Steve is no longer in full-time practice, he now educates chiropractors around the world in new ways to flourish in any economy by creating a different practice model. He is known for his Steve-isms, my favorites. The ones that always stuck with me when we were first getting acquainted was talking about the first downs in practice and really setting the end zone and winning the game, and most importantly, celebrating those times in the end zone, not just stretching the field. Dr. Steve, welcome to the show.
Sam, it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to
see you. Thanks for
too.
inviting me.
Absolutely. So happy to have you. So I want to share a little bit with the audience here. So like I said, I've known Steve for a long time, for several years, and initially one of the main reasons that I really gravitated toward this guy is because he always thought differently. And in a chiropractic profession that thinks differently than the mainstream, he was a guy who thought different than most chiropractors. And from what I've experienced with him, he also sees things really before they happen, very prophetic. So he's always ahead of the curve. So today, Steve, if you could, just to get started, to kick this all off, just tell us about yourself, give us a little bit of your history that, and expand upon what I've shared.
Oh, thanks, Sam. Gosh, I'm kind of old, so my history goes back pretty far. I think the important things in the history for your people are, I was a PhD candidate where I was taught how to think, not just what to think. Went on to chiropractic college where I became a problem because philosophically we were taught that the body is a dynamic, constantly evolving, self-healing, self-regulating organism in tune with its environment and able to adapt in a timely and appropriate way. And then clinically we were taught to do the same as we did last time, as long as what we did last time seemed to produce a positive result. And I went crazy. You just can't have it both ways.
Right.
The body is either dynamic or it's static, not both. And so I became a problem, and I started thinking outside the chiropractic box, if you will, in order to be able to find people different on a visit-to-visit basis and help their nervous systems evolve, rather than just create a new, somewhat less destructive pattern of distortion.
There we are.
I think that's the Reader's Digest version.
There we go. And touching on some of those things, so like I said, the biggest foundational piece that we teach everybody in our practice and that we really emphasize is that adaptability, right? That the body is this dynamic organism that is constantly evolving. It's constantly taking information in from its environment. And most people don't understand that when they think about chiropractic. They think about chiropractic as just this treatment for back pain or neck pain, maybe headaches if you're lucky. Some weirdos take their kids to them, but no one really knows why. They don't really understand any of that. The people that are practice, they do, but let's talk a little bit about some of those concepts, and specifically talking about the technique that we use. So if we're talking about a neurologically based model, we're focusing on optimal function of brain and nerve system communication. how does MC2 achieve that? Because for those people that out there that haven't been adjusted or been in our practice, it doesn't look like a traditional chiropractic adjustment. It's very gentle, it's very specific. Oftentimes there's no twisting, popping, or cracking, but yet we get better results than most other chiropractors out there. So explain, how does that happen with what you developed?
Well, I think it's important, Sam, that the public understands how these spinal neurological problems develop that chiropractors tend to focus on and care for. And so the proper term for this nervous system involvement or interference is a subluxation. And quite frankly, there are causes of subluxation and effects of subluxation that we should all be conscious of and aware of. Traditionally, chiropractic has looked at causes of subluxation being physical, chemical, and emotional stress beyond the nervous system's ability to constructively adapt. Today, we also have a fourth stress, which is environmental stress. And it's just like this COVID thing going on. Some people get it and get really sick from it. Some people get it and don't even know they have it. And so it's not the germ, it's not the stress that's the issue, but rather your resistance to the germ or your ability to constructively adapt to the stress that becomes the issue. And so MC2 looked at this from this standpoint. How does the bone, in traditional chiropractic, how does the bone get out of place to begin with? Well, we could almost understand it from a physical trauma standpoint, but how does a chemical trauma, an emotional trauma, and environmental trauma impact and affect the nervous system in a way that causes a bony misalignment? And so the answer to that question is all of these stresses or stressors are vibratory frequencies that our brain and nervous system attempts to adapt to. And when doing so, if the stress is beyond the system's ability to constructively adapt, muscles tighten up. And when muscles tighten up, muscles move bones. And if the stress is continuous, the bone is moved out of place and it's sustained in an out of place position, which then negatively impacts the nervous system further, drives that individual's adaptability down, and we wind up with a downward spiral for that individual's health and well-being. Well, traditional chiropractic entered the equation where the bone went out of place. MC2 enters the equation at the vibratory frequency that caused the muscle distortion that caused the bone to go out of place. So to simplify that, chiropractors have ever always looked at a vertebral subluxation or a bone out of place model. MC2 looks at a neural subluxation and interference in the function of the nervous system driven by stress that the nervous system can't constructively adapt to. And quite frankly, we're seeing a lot of that, far more than we've ever seen it before, in this COVID-averse society that we live in, because everybody is being traumatized by the media, by concerns, by fears, by the virus itself. And I don't know if you want me to get into where that leads, but it leads to a sympathetic nervous system dominant or a fight or flight dominant state of function in the nervous system, which is highly detrimental. We're meant to get into fight or flight when there's a stress or a trauma, and then get out of it when that passes. And today what we're dealing with are people who are in a chronic state of fight or flight. They can't even recognize when it's appropriate for them to calm down, for them to rest and digest, as we used to say in school.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered or over-answered your question, Sam.
We've got plenty of time, so don't worry about over answering. Love it. No, I love, like I said, we use this approach in practice because we all wholeheartedly believe in it, because the point in which my brain really broke when it came to trying to apply this neurological application in a traditional chiropractic model was another mentor asked the question, well, how does a bottle of Diet Coke knock a bone out of place? And sat there and always, unless it falls off the shelf, that's really the only explanation. Because how, other than that, how is it really going to happen? And I was like, well, I don't know. I didn't have an answer for it. And then proceeded to explain again the vibratory frequencies, the perceptions, and the information that your nervous system is picking up that ultimately leads to this global distortion in the body. Again, whether it's in the muscles, whether it's in the fascia, ligamentous tissue, any of the soft tissue components that ultimately pull on the rigid skeletal structures, which we know now through even just the most basic neuroscience that there's a feedback and feed forward mechanism in the body. That posture is going to feed forward into the brain, which is going to feed back into the body, and it's going to continue this downward loop as you talked about.
Yep. The brain rarely sends a message out before it receives a message in. And the message in as well as the message out can be, and often are, altered when we're stressed.
Big time, yeah. Especially seeing the patterns that we have with everybody coming in, whether it's the heightened up in the shoulders, whether it's the tightening of the chest or the neck or anything. I mean, in this crazy time, and especially now with our society being more sedentary than they ever have, especially during the quarantine, it just continues to drive this model and this understanding of how we're looking at the neurology and the stress patterns in the body. You did bring up fight or flight, so let's talk a little bit more. I want to talk a little bit more about that in regards to the big population that we see, which is in kids. And I think to talk about kids, we probably have to even start before that in the expectant moms. So how does all this stress impact the moms and I guess the moms to be?
Well, you have to realize, and I think the viewers have to realize that just being pregnant is an additional stress on the system. It's an emotional stress, it's a physical stress, it's a biochemical stress. The problem is for these moms to be, they're subject to all of those stresses and environmental stress at the same time. And so all of these are acting on mom, and whatever happens to mom influences what happens to the baby that's developing within her. So, easy to say that mom should, de-stress as much as possible, but that's not always possible. And the answer to that, in my mind, is to have the folks understand where chiropractic, or at least tonal chiropractic, MC2 chiropractic, fits into the scheme of things. We are broken down by stress based on our individual ability to adapt to that stress. If our adaptability level is high, then it only takes extraordinary amounts of stress to have a negative impact on us. If our adaptability to stress is low, almost any stress can put us over the edge. And so the purpose of chiropractic prenatally, perinatally, postnatally for both mom and baby is to make sure that both of their abilities to adapt to the stress that they're under are as high as possible. And frankly, it's the kind of the hidden secret about why people get well under a chiropractic model. It's not that chiropractic is a treatment for this, that, or something else. And I know you want to talk about ADD and ADHD and things like that as we progress today. We're not treatments for any of those things. Chiropractors, or at least traditional chiropractors, often operate in a treatment modality mindset, but rather look to enhance the health potential of each individual in their care. And I think that then gives that individual the best possible chance to be as healthy as they could be now and for the rest of their lives. So what mom wouldn't want to give their unborn baby or born baby every advantage when it comes to optimizing their health potential, both now and for the rest of their life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know of any parent out there that wouldn't want that, and that's certainly what I want for my kid, and like I said, everybody else would want too. So
right.
With the mom's undergoing extra stress, both again now they're carrying the kiddo, they're coming to labor and delivery, and now postnatal. How does chiropractic then step into those first days, weeks, and months of life, and especially in this model? Because again, we're not talking about the snap, crackle, pop approach. We're not talking about moving bones. We're talking about optimizing the actual well-being of the human. So how does it fit into that model?
Well, I think that is largely, Sam, an answer that any and every chiropractor should offer on their own. Mm-hmm. I can certainly give you examples from my history in practice. And, I think what set the stage for me is I had an opportunity right after graduating college to work with a very established chiropractor who gave me enough rope to really experience what does and doesn't work. And one of the first things I did in his practice is I created a banner that said, "It's better to grow healthy children than repair damaged adults." Well, I believe that. I mean, that makes total sense to me. And that became a preamble to who I became as a chiropractor and what I did. Shortly thereafter, I had two children. I had one in 1983, one in 1986. They're adults now, maybe older than you, Sam. And the issue with my kids was both were difficult births. My son was born with a very low APGAR score in neonatal intensive care. And it was like, you know what? This is where the rubber meets the road. And so I started taking care of my son almost immediately after birth. And he became, and my daughter 3 years later became, what we lovingly refer to as chiropractic kids. I think for chiropractors, if they line 10 kids up, 7-year-olds say, and 5 are chiropractic kids and 5 aren't, the chiropractic kids can be picked out of the crowd somehow, and I'm sure Rivers is an example of this. They're just shinier, they're brighter, you know that they're functioning at a different level than other kids. And as a parent, for me it was heartbreaking that other kids are held to a disadvantage just because their folks don't know what chiropractic can bring to the equation. And so for me, dealing with children was something that I did because I had them, not because I was necessarily trained to do so. Shortly thereafter, as luck would have it, we were in a small town, and I started seeing a number of moms bring their babies in, their infants in, with ear infections. And almost always it was, we're scheduled to have tubes put in Johnny's ears on Friday. It's Tuesday. Can you help Johnny? And the answer, unfortunately, was, I don't know if I could help Johnny, but I know I can improve his health potential. I need more than 2 days. The tube surgery is an elective surgery. Can you just put it off? Can you give me, I don't know, a month? And let's see what happens. Well, the reason we were seeing so many of these is because moms talk to one another. God bless them. And the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 moms that brought their kids in also saw their children's ear infections resolve while under my care. And ultimately, they didn't schedule the surgery. And so anytime a mommy came up with a kid with problems like this, somehow through the grapevine in a small town, they were referred to me. And really, that's how my pediatric practice started. Where it took off, Sam, is I came to the office one morning, and I think you're aware of the story of the mom with the two little bundles when I walked into my waiting room.
Yep.
Yeah. So this was a pivotal moment, not just for her, not just for her children, but for me as a practitioner. So long story short, I walk into my office one morning, and there's a mom with two bundles. And after greeting one another, she explains that these two children have not kept any food down since the moment they were born. They've probably not a good subject at this time of the day for folks, but they projectile vomited everything they took in from the time that they were born. They were now 6 weeks old and within ounces of their original birth weight, finally diagnosed as failure to thrive. Can I save her babies? That was her question.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave her, it's the right word, Sam. I gave her an inappropriate answer, but it was the only answer that would have allowed me to look at these kids. And I told her, you bet, bring them on back. And I checked our babies. I want your audience to know that I wasn't being cavalier in my response. She had taken them everywhere. She was just back from the Mayo Clinic. The best in the medical profession had already looked at her kids, looked at why they weren't keeping their food down, looked at did they have an esophageal problem, stomach problem, sphincter problem, this problem, that problem, and they couldn't find anything. So they lumped them into the category of failure to thrive and sent her home to enjoy her babies as much as she could, while she could.
Yeah.
The one thing I knew was that nobody looked to see if their nervous systems were functioning in a normal way, and that was my job. So I, again, wasn't treating her children for failure to thrive. I was looking to make sure that their nervous system was functioning as normally as possible so that they, in turn, could function as normally as possible. And again, long story short, but mom comes in the next day, all smiles. The babies had kept their food down that morning, that afternoon, that evening, that night, the following morning, the following mid-morning. I mean, they were now thriving rather than, at best, barely surviving. And, she claims I cured her babies. I didn't cure them. I restored normal function to their nervous system so that they could function in as normal a way as possible. The important part of that story isn't that her children survived, although it's certainly important to them. The important part of the story is ultimately when I left that community, they were these beautiful 12-year-old redheaded freckle-faced boys who were the picture of health. And the question I asked her and the question I'll ask your audience is, what's their future like? How did what we did impact and affect their future? Not only their present, but now. Could you imagine if they had just barely survived and now 40 years later, as adults, what their life and health could look like? They'd be the most sickly among us. Instead, they're likely to be the healthiest among us. And the important piece here is I bought into the idea that chiropractic would lead to a better world tomorrow, and tomorrow wasn't the next day, but tomorrow was decades, if not generations, into the future. We left an indelible positive mark on this family's tree that will have effects for generations to come. So it's based on this that I drove my passion in practice, in chiropractic, to focus on growing healthy children rather than simply repairing damaged adults. Sorry, Sam, I know, again, long answer, short question, but I think it's important for you folks to put chiropractic into proper perspective.
Absolutely. And again, no need to apologize. And I want to come back around and emphasize something on that too, because for the audience out there, this is a totally different understanding of health than probably 99% of people listening to this understand. This isn't about, again, treating any particular symptoms or diseases or any kind of pathology in the body. This is about restoring the optimal function and physiology in the body. And it really comes back down to a foundational understanding of how you look at your own self and other human beings. You either believe that the body is made to be broken, or you believe that the body has this innate capacity to heal. And it really just comes down to what your experiences are, and again, it's what you believe. And if you understand physiology, understand neurology, understand all the ologies, how the body works, you understand that the body can heal and regulate as long as there isn't any interference to that function. If there is, well, then the only thing that can happen is symptoms, sickness, and disease. But if there is no interference in that communication, then the body has no choice but to be healthy, because that's how it functions. So I want to just want to hit that point again for everybody, because it's really, really critical. It's really important to understand that, and especially in this time now, because this is a conversation we've had with a lot of people, and I've brought up to, I think, everybody that I know, because of the frustration I'm sure other chiropractors potentially listening or other health practitioners with this mindset listening are also frustrated by, is that there is no conversation out here talking about, well, what can we do to be healthier? Not what can we do to be less sick. And it's very frustrating to see, especially having the answer to that. And this is a piece of it. This isn't all of it, by no means. But it's a big piece of it, because this is where it all starts. And like we tell people that come in who've been to, 13 different functional medicine practitioners, 42 different doctors, 17 neurologists, a podiatrist, and hopefully not a proctologist, but they come in and they've looked for all the disease, everything, every test comes back normal, and it's like, well, why am I still sick? Well, let's check some things on you. Oh, well, these are here. Well, no one's ever looked at this before. Okay, well, I'm sorry that no one has, but they should have. And this is the reason why we exist, because we check for these things to ultimately let the body function, so that, hey, when you take these vitamins, you can absorb it. When you take your fish oils, you can absorb them. When you want to go to sleep at night, you can. That's what we do. So I actually have never asked this question. I've always been curious for you, and we'll kind of back into talking about the ADHD and autistic children, but how did you end up developing MC2? Where did this come from?
That's a great question, Sam. And again, unfortunately, a long story.
It's okay.
But the answer is this: it was evolutionary for me. I studied as many different chiropractic techniques that I could, no pun intended, get my hands on, and I tried to extract the gems from each of them in order to build a new model. And so I think the important pieces for your audience are related to what I perceive their perception is an adjustment. Because you mentioned early on that MC2 adjustments are exquisitely soft, easy, honoring to the individual. And it's hard to imagine that within the same context of us moving bones,
right.
Sometimes aggressively moving bones. And so I was what was referred to as an upper cervical chiropractor, and the technique itself was forceful. However, I was exposed to another upper cervical technique called Grostic.
Yeah, let me just interrupt real quick, Steve. Let me just interrupt for the audience that doesn't know out there.
Please.
What they mean upper cervical, he's talking about the very top of the neck where your skull meets your neck, focusing on this area here. It's right where the brainstem is. It's a very, very important neurological area. Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to, for those that didn't understand what that
No
is.
worries. Thank you, Sam.
Yep.
We call it Houston control,
Right.
because it's where the brainstem is available.
Right.
And an upper cervical technique that I learned was a technique called Grostic. And what Grostic was about was getting the exact right angle to correct the subluxation, with the idea being that if we could have the exact right angle in, then the amount of force necessary is minimized. And that was a mind-blowing thing for me, that we didn't have to forcibly move a bone, but rather could be welcomed into the system. I also studied a technique called Logan, which is a reflex-based technique where the doctor takes a very soft contact and looks for changes in the muscle tone all the way up the spine. That was perhaps the first truly tonal technique in chiropractic. And so what I learned from these is I don't have to beat my way into the nervous system. I can find a way to be welcome into the nervous system. And as a result, the adjustments in an MC2 model, as you mentioned at the beginning, hardly resemble a typical chiropractic adjustment, a typical chiropractic adjustment to move a bone. Because really what we're trying to do is introduce a three-dimensional vibratory frequency that the brain can accept and create positive changes in the muscle tone, which in turn would create more structural integrity. Think on this for a second, because I think this is critical. A little while ago, what we talked about was what causes subluxation. And what we said was it was a stress, an outside-in stress, which is what? A three-dimensional vibratory frequency or frequencies that are picked up by the nervous system that the nervous system can't properly, constructively adapt to, which then causes the distortion in the muscle system and the skeletal system. MC2 is the exact opposite of that. It introduces a positive, constructive, three-dimensional vibratory frequency into the nervous system that it can comprehend and constructively adapt to in order to unwind the accumulated stress in that system. And so I think the takeaway is the doctor is not seeking to overcome the internal resistance of the body with the adjustment, but rather find where he or she is welcomed into that system so that it's not a traumatic experience for the patient or the doctor for that matter, which is why we can, without reservation, adjust pregnant mommies, newborns, infants, and people my age and older. So it's exquisitely safe as well as exquisitely effective.
Absolutely. I mean, the results we see in talking to other MC2 docs, there's proof in the pudding there. We didn't mention it explicitly here, but it is something I want to bring up since we talked about this particular environment. But this was, I think, a concept you introduced to us, and it's especially pertinent now. But this concept of not only custom building an adjustment specific for somebody, but the word that you use is intensity. So the intensity of the adjustment is very, very important. That I think most people out there, if this is a concept, if you go to see a chiropractor, ask them if this is something that they take into account when adjusting you. Because remember, we're not just, if they're just moving a bone, they're not just moving a bone, because that bone moving also is going to affect what happens up in the brain. So
that's right.
I want to talk about this because especially now we have a very overwhelmed society. Some might say a very overexhausted society. So how smart is it then to put a big force into a system that's already overwhelmed?
Well, you know, that's a great question, and I wish you had a chiropractic listenership as well as a public listenership. Right. I hope that you do, because it's critical in today's day and age. So, Sam, here's the thought. Mm-hmm. Either the nervous system is healthy and functional and optimized, or it's not. And if it's not, the disruption in normal nervous system function typically fits into three general categories. It's either under-aroused or understimulated, over-aroused or overstimulated, or unstable. Okay? Where an unstable is nothing more than sometimes it's over-aroused, sometimes it's under-aroused. Okay? And over time, unstable and over-aroused lead to an exhausted nervous system. Okay? And the different health problems that people experience largely can be categorized based on under-arousal, over-arousal, unstable, or exhausted. Now, back 40 years ago, I could do almost anything forceful when it came to adjusting people and get a positive result because the overwhelming majority of the public were in a state of under-arousal. And so a high impact adjustment aroused their nervous system and kind of kick-started it to function at a higher level.
Right.
Gee, I got to tell you, I don't think any chiropractors are finding anybody these days who have nervous systems that are under-aroused. The problem with traditional adjusting is it's still highly effective, but it's highly effective for a very limited amount of time and a very limited number of adjustments before that additional stimulation to that individual's nervous system puts them over the edge. Now, it doesn't create health issues, but what it creates is, how can I put this? It creates a nervous system that needs that done to it over and over and over again. It creates a dependency on this new stimulus. Just think of it as caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the beginning you have a cup of coffee and you don't really recognize that it's a stimulant. But try quitting. You'll recognize it's a stimulant pretty quickly.
Right.
So the same goes with these high force chiropractic adjustments. Nothing wrong with them. They work great, but slippery slope somewhere down the line if the doctor isn't taking into consideration the state of arousal of that individual's nervous system. Up until the COVID crisis, I was, based on feedback from my clients, I was finding that people were either unstable or over-aroused. And some had migrated to exhausted. And I'm sure that's what you found too, Sam.
Yep.
Since COVID, we're finding more exhausted nervous systems, more over-aroused nervous systems, as people are stuck in their head about the stress that they're living under. You know, someone I studied with decades ago, a fellow by the name of Bruce Lipton, published a book called The Biology of Belief. And it's a great book, and I would encourage your people to get it and read it.
Fantastic book.
But it boils down to this.
Mm-hmm.
You either can grow or protect. You can't do both. And while society is out there trying to protect themselves from getting sick, what they're not doing is pursuing health. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Can't do both.
Right.
Can't pursue, grow, and avoid at the same time. Okay? And unfortunately, what we have created is a defensive society that is trying to not get sick rather than a society that is in pursuit of growing their health now and over the course of their lives.
Absolutely. And something said in the middle of that I want to bring up, because the age-old complaint that most chiropractors hear from the public is, oh, once you go, you always got to keep going. Well, what if as a chiropractor you are part of that problem because you're habituating a nervous system that needs that input, and you're now creating an individual, as we talked about at the beginning, who's not adapting. And if you're not adapting,
That's
well,
right.
then you're really suffering, and your health is going to really suffer, even though maybe you're getting that quick fix to feel better in that moment. But it's really nothing more than a glorified aspirin, if you will.
You know, you're spot on, Sam, but the bromide is a problem. Okay? People don't think past the bromide. Oh, you went once, you have to go the rest of your life.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Right. You cannot.
But I bet your folks want to. Okay? Love to. Really appreciate what chiropractic is doing for them. Hey, watch. You know, I started brushing my teeth when I was, 2, and I've had to do it the rest of my life.
That's right.
I got these when I was 9. Not these, but glasses. And I've had to wear them the rest of my life. How many people are on what are known as lifestyle medications? Chronic pain. They take a painkiller, when? For the rest of their life. What if they have, heaven forbid, serious health issues like diabetes or heart disease or depression or whatever it is? They're on that medication for the rest of their life. So this bromide of, you went to a chiropractor, you have to go the rest of your life. All people have to do is think of what they're really being told, and they realize how absurd and ridiculous this is. You know what? I have COVID hair. You know, I haven't gotten a haircut since February. Okay? I normally look like you, Sam, nice and short. No, still great, but nice and short. You know, I feel like it's the 60s again with the length of my hair. Because, you know, I got a haircut once, and I have to keep getting it cut for the rest of my life. It's an absurdity, and I wish people would think through the absurdity rather than get stuck in a bromide that's designed to inhibit them from experiencing something that would be good for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're a California guy, so you got to have long hair, right?
Yeah. So I fit in, right?
Exactly. So let's circle back to talking about the over-arousal and under-arousal piece, because this fits in really well with talking about kids, and specifically with children with neurosensory problems. So the kids really struggling with ADHD, with dyslexia, with autism, any of those kind of issues. So how appropriate then for these kids is it to have not only an adjustment that's custom built, but obviously one that's neurologically appropriate?
Well, again, this is something that really needs to be looked at on a visit-to-visit basis. In my opinion, these kids have unstable nervous system. And what that means is you have to be able to assess on a visit-to-visit basis, am I seeing little Johnny in a state of over-arousal, which is largely the case, or under-arousal? And if they're under-aroused, what do I need to do to bring that nervous system's level of functionality up? But if they're over-aroused, what do I need to do to down-regulate that nervous system? So it's an individual question for individual patients on individual visits, and it's really about what shows up during the assessment, rather than adjusting the same things over and over and over again, expecting a different result. It's really a question of what's showing up on that visit and what's the least I can do to that individual that would be the most I could do for that individual. Now look, today, ADD, ADHD, spectrum disorders are rampant, and we could certainly get into a conversation about why that may be so. Back in the day, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was rare that you saw a kid with ADD or ADHD. But the approach was the same. You know, Sam, hopefully you brought me on because I'm a storyteller. So the story here that I think is appropriate is I had a single mom start care in my office, obviously stressed, and took care of her. If you understand my MO, which we discussed at the beginning of the hour, I really only wanted to take care of adults in order to get to the kids. And so I was constantly trying to educate this mom about how important it was that she brought her 9-year-old in. And every time I did, she would rebuke me with, oh, he's fine, there's nothing wrong with him, he has no aches or pains, his teachers like him, he's doing okay in school. And I just couldn't get her to bring him in. And then finally, one day she says to me, well, you know, Dr. Steve, he does have ADD. Can you help him with that? And again, I gave an inappropriate answer and said, sure, bring him in. Why? I wasn't going to treat him for ADD, and I don't think we should be treating people for ADD, ADHD, spectrum disorders, or whatever. We need to be cognizant of where they are so that we treat them in an appropriate way. And when I say treat, I don't mean what we do, but how we do what we do. And she finally brings him in, and this kid is the most chemically straitjacketed kid you've ever seen. He has no affect, doesn't care if he's there or not there, doesn't care if he gets adjusted or doesn't get adjusted, is just as likely to not answer a question as answer a question. And it was months before he says to me, Dr. Steve, could what you're doing be making me not get mad? I went, what do you mean? And he said, you know, I've become really good at making friends. And, you know, for your audience, translate this into 9-year-old-ese. You know, I've become really good at making friends because I'll make friends, someone will say or do something really stupid that makes me angry, we'll get into an argument or a fight, and all of a sudden I'm looking for new friends. And since I've been coming in here, you know, magic words, right? Since I've been coming in here, he says, my friends are still saying and doing stupid things, but it doesn't make me get mad. I'm actually making some good friends. So, oh, okay. Well, let's get you even happier and get you checked and adjusted today. But on the way out, I wanted to grab his mom because what's the value of helping a kid with ADD or not helping a kid with ADD? Well, we talked about this before, Sam. The rest of their life is on the line. And I wanted to have this conversation with Mom. So I talked to her about what did she hear, and she said he's making friends, and I shared what I heard. And what I heard was that he's making friends that he would have ruined in the past. And then I extrapolated it forward. What did that mean? I heard he was going to have a better job, a better future, a better life, because he wasn't going to be tagged as a troublemaker as he went from job to job to job because he kept getting into incidents with his coworkers every time that they said or did something that upset him. I knew he was going to have a better relationship in his future because every time his significant other said or did something that upset him, he wasn't going to blow it all up. And what I said to her was, you know, your forethought, bringing this kid in here, gave him as better future as he would have had if you brought him in deaf and he got his hearing back. And she started to cry, and I know you know me, Sam. I started to cry. But what were the tears about? The tears were about that was the God's honest truth. Mm-hmm. This child's entire future, on every conceivable level, would be better not getting mad the first time someone said or did something that upset him. I don't know how to treat ADD. I do know how to normalize a malfunctioning nervous system, and that's what MC2 is about. Now, there are people who've taken MC2 that have taken it to another level and actually specialize in taking care of kids who are on the spectrum. And I applaud them for that. And they use MC2 as the engine behind their analysis on these kids on a day-to-day, visit-to-visit basis.
Absolutely.
Does that help?
Yeah, big time. And to emphasize for parents out there kind of what that looks like in the practice, because any parent who has a kid with any of these things, whether it's ADHD, whether they're hyperactive, bouncing off walls, whether they're a kiddo struggling with sensory processing, who just even the wrong shirt is going to set their kid off, or any spectrum disorder where it could fall, under anywhere under the sun. It's important to be able to work with a chiropractor who can meet your kid where they're at, right? Because as Dr. Steve really, really drove home, they're going to come in differently every time. And they should, because we've said this now, this is probably the fourth time, your body is a constantly adapting, ever-changing organism. And if we're doing the same thing, we're not honoring that. So to see where your kid's at and say, okay, where's your kiddo at today? How do we need to work with him in order for us to bring out the best? Then the next visit, we ask that exact same question. And it's this constant evolution and this beautiful dance that we do to meet people where they are. Again, whether they're a kiddo with one of these conditions, whether they're an adult, whether they're a senior citizen, any of those things. And that's the beautiful piece of it, is we can custom build it to you, to match where you're at. There we
What
are.
a concept.
What a concept. Who would have thought? So let's end with some really good takeaways for people and the homework that you gave me when we were talking. But we're in this environment. We're all stressed to the nines. We talked about how chiropractic can help to adapt to that stress, because any doctor telling you to go home and be less stressed is a completely useless statement for anybody. The fact that they say that blows my mind. It's like, well, good luck. It's like trying to say, hey, just breathe better underwater. But what are some things to do beyond chiropractic to help build a healthy child and help build a healthy you? Let's talk about some of these things.
Okay, well, I just want to put some context around this for you folks, Sam, and it's this. Chiropractic can exist in a vacuum, but it doesn't have to.
Right.
When my kids were growing up, it wasn't just checking them and adjusting them when it was necessary in order to attempt to give them a healthy future. We were also conscious about quantity and quality of sleep. We were conscious about quantity and quality of hydration. My wife is a health food nut, so it was really about, well, what do they eat and how much do they eat and when do they eat, what kind of activity, what kind of health developmental approaches did we wish to use with our kids in order to ensure as healthy a future as we possibly could help create for them. And that's what I do with clients. There are lots of canned plans of approaches in chiropractic for a wellness program or a health development program. But I don't want anybody to buy my program. I don't want anybody to buy your program, Sam. What I want parents to do is to actually consciously plan what they want their child's health future to look like. And so that fits into a 5-stage approach very quickly. 1, vision. What do they want their child's future to look like? What do they want their child's health to look like now and in the future? Once that's crystal clear, the next question is, well, what skills, talents, and abilities will need to be brought to bear in order to make that happen? Obviously, chiropractic is one of those. Obviously, school. And when I say school, I mean school that fits into the parent's paradigm of what's going to contribute to their child's health and well-being. So it could be regular school, it could be gymnastics, it could be athletics, it could be recess, it could be playing with friends. So what skills, talents, and abilities will be necessary? Sam, I got to tell you, my son was a great baseball player until he had a baseball coach that ruined him. Okay? Happened.
Yep.
Hasn't played baseball since. So the teacher, the coach, is a critical part of that equation. And you want to make sure that the people who are interacting with your children have the appropriate skill set to accomplish your vision for your child. Then, what's the motivation? Well, in dealing with many things in our life, it's a question of actually determining what the motivation is. When it comes to parenting, the motivation is your child. And what greater motivation is there than your child? You know, at one time in my life, I weighed 70 pounds more than I weigh now. But then I had a grandchild. And so I do what I do, and I eat what I eat, and I behave the way I behave. My motivation is I want to be around to enjoy him and have him enjoy me for as long as I possibly can. Okay? So what's the motivation? Then resources. What resources will you need to grow and develop your child's health over the course of their life? Well, that depends on where they're at. Okay? Whether it's a bouncy gym when they're 3, or being able to play t-ball when they're 6, or fill in the blanks. These are all the resources that you bring into the fold in order to ensure your child's health and health development. But then, once you've laid out those 4 pieces, then you can put a plan together. You know, Rivers is how old, Sam?
He's 3.5.
3.5.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what you're doing for Rivers' health and health development now won't be the same thing that you would do for his health and health development in another 3.5 years, or in another 7 years,
Mm-hmm.
or in another 10 years. Kids grow, they develop. What you do with him at 3.5, some of those things may carry forward for the rest of their life. You know, my kids are very conscious about hydration, even though they're in their 30s. They're both very conscious about their nutrition, even though they're in their 30s. My daughter is a premier yoga instructor because she's very conscious about balance, about structural integrity, about movement, about flexibility. My son is a gym rat because he understands that he's got to develop his own health and vitality over the course of his life. Okay? Not now, not for tomorrow, but for a greater tomorrow. I mean decades and generations into the future. Okay? So all of that fits into health development. And I would encourage your audience to stop thinking from a wellness standpoint. It's a garbage can term these days.
It is.
Health development or peak performance is really what we're after. And so what do you do other than check Rivers on a regular basis to make sure there's no nerve interference in order for him to have peak performance in his life, even though he's just 3.5?
Mm-hmm. So for us to answer that, I'm trying to keep it in the same linear progression that you gave our audience here. So with the vision, I mean, Lynn and I have the vision of him being obviously the healthiest, most capable human being that he can, which then starts with, let's start with the schooling piece, because he's now old enough to be in preschool. For us, it was really important for him to be in a school that emphasizes language. So he's in a school right now where he's learning Mandarin at 3.5. Why?
Nice.
Because his brain can absorb all this information now, and it will literally wire him further on in life where it'll be easier for him to learn new languages. So if he wanted to pick up something else down the road, it'll be much easier than it would be like for me, where it's pretty much impossible because I only grew up speaking one language. Then we take into account screen time. As we talked about earlier with technology, you're not going to get away from it. Screens are everywhere. I'm surrounded by 7 different computers right now. So we have to offset the amount of time that he's in front of a computer with time outside. Because for those of you that understand physiology, the sun isn't bad, the sun's good. We need the sun, and we've got less than a minute left here, but to encapsulate some of this, you need to be outside. So we offset that with him getting outside and moving and playing in the daylight. We emphasize great quality sleep, which means he's comfortable, He's going to bed at a reasonable time, and we try to not interrupt that time. So even though maybe he'll be late for school today, oh well, sleep right now is more important than being somewhere on time. We emphasize great quality nutrition and also supplementation, because unfortunately our diets aren't going to cover all the bases, and that's what a supplement's for. So supplements aren't there to replace food. Supplements are there to fill in the gaps. And figure out in your diet right now where those missing pieces are. Eat the foods that contain those nutrients, and then again, supplement it as needed. So those are some of the pieces that we do. And then again, just practicing time to unwind. The funniest thing now is seeing him sit down on the ground and tell us to sit down and close our eyes and take this meditative pose. Because he's seen us meditate. Because he's seen us take time away from everything else and just detach. And I think that's a really important piece, especially on mental health, which we barely touched on today. So those are some of the things that we do. And again, I want to encourage everybody else out there, take these steps, come up with the vision, come up with the motivation, find the resources, and then ultimately deploy the plan. So that's all the time we got, Dr. Steve. Thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure. I hope it was useful for your audience.
I absolutely can know that it was. We touched on some great things today for everybody. So thank you everybody so much for tuning in today to the Wild and Precious Optimal Living Show. Hopefully you picked up some great pieces along the way. And as always, you can reach out to our office at 720-667-3650. And I just want to close out with the question that we always ask. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? We'll see you in 2 weeks.